Let's do this very quickly. I want to try this for today's show. I don't know if it's going to work. I want to do a mini BC resume review with Tyron Woodley. We talked about him earlier being in this interesting crossroads. Here's why I wanted to bring it up. Because if he loses BC, there's going to be a big question about whether he's done now. And if he is, that will certainly be a time to remember his career. But I want to kind of get out in front of that a little bit and sort of think about what brought him to this moment. He made his pro debut in February of 2019 on some local show, but he was fighting in Strikeforce BC by June of 2009. Very quickly, do you recall the first time Tyron Woodley made your radar?
Yeah, certainly in the Strikeforce days. I would probably throw out there the Paul Daly fight from 2011 was one that really caught my attention. And then certainly, who can forget the loss to Nate Marquardt the following year, Luke, which... can you tell me a more violent finish between two very well-equipped fighters in modern MMA history? I mean, good God.
It was a bad one. That was a really bad one. He made his debut in June of 2009. He beat some dude named Salvador Woods. Then he beat Zach Light, who used to be the Bellator matchmaker under Bjorn Rebney. And then he beat Rudy Bears, who is sort of an okay fighter. And then he beat Nathan Coy. I think that was the first time he caught my attention. That was on a Challengers card. So then the first time he was on a big card was Diaz versus Nunes 2, October of 2010, and he beat Andre Galvao. In fact, he stopped him with strikes as your camera goes out, and we'll fix that here in the first round. That was the first time he got on my radar because I've been paying close attention to the career of Andre Galvao. I wanted to see how good he would look in MMA. He never really looked all that good inside of MMA. Obviously, he had some wins, but it never really was for him or the best expression of what he could do as an athlete. But beating him obviously was kind of a big deal for no other reason than name value. You obviously look at Woodley as muscular as he was all the way back in 2010, so 11 years at this point, and you add in the fact that he had that Big Ten wrestling pedigree in his back pocket, you're like, okay, this is a guy to pay attention to. And then he beats Tarek Safadine in January of 2011, and they headlined that card together. Very close fight. Tyron had to win it off of his wrestling, but he got it done. He moved to 7-0. We're going to wait for BC to come back. I want to spend most of my time on the UFC side of things. Then, as you indicate, he beat Paul Daly. Not an exciting fight. He had to hold him up against the fence the entire time, but he got it done in July of 2011. So then you move to 2012. He beat Jordan Meehan via split decision. So he had some decent wins. He was certainly undefeated through his Strikeforce campaign heading into a title shot. But against Nate Marquardt, who was fighting at welterweight at the time, that was a tough go. He actually gave it to Nate Marquardt throughout various portions of that fight, but in the fourth round at 139 for the vacant at the time Strikeforce welterweight championship, I believe Shields had abandoned it, something like that. He got hit with a combination of an uppercut and slashing elbow up against the fence. It was a brutal knockout, but that was the end of his Strikeforce campaign. We are still waiting for BC. This is BC's way of getting out of this segment. That's what this is. I see him setting up his situation there. So then he moves in February of 2013 to the UFC. He fought Jay Heron and knocked him out in 36 seconds. It was as good of a UFC debut as he could have had. It was over at the time a credentialed and respected name. It was emphatic, it was immediate, and it was a reflection of the kinds of things he could do when he really let his hands go and showed you the possibilities of his offense. He then moved into about a UFC 161 with Jake Shields, which he lost via split decision. This is an insanely boring contest that low on volume, low on high on both of them trying to manage error, and as a consequence, just not doing a whole hell of a lot in the process. I'm just going to run through this because BC, what do you remember about the loss to Jake Shields? Oh, he doesn't have them. All right, well, this is fun. This is a good time. I'm having a good time. He's bringing him back now. Let's see.
Hey, you guys could just put me back on the show now. My camera's on. I mean,
there we
come
go.
on, can we just do? I mean, look, let's try to act like it's my fault here. Jay Aaron gives me this freaking GoPro on the road. All right, can we step up
could
our?
You spend more time in Puerto Rico? I think it'd be great for the show.
Hey, like you, for many years, I have another job. But I've been listening to you, Luke, and you're right. So he was a wrestler early, Tyron Woodley, and as much as that Tarek Safradine win and some of those others in Strikeforce showed you the future, potential, Luke, even at the start of the UFC run, as you're mentioning right now, he didn't really establish himself as the dangerous threat with the striking. I mean, it took a while, Luke.
It did. Although by the time he got to the UFC, you saw a little bit more of it because he beats Jay Huron. The fight against Shields sucked both ways. Both guys were not very, fun. And then he comes back at UFC 167 later that year, his third fight in 2013, and he KO'd Josh Koscheck at 4:38 into the first round. This was his first ever bonus, BC. He got knockout of the night. So now you're like, okay, you had the fight with Jake Shields and it wasn't good, but you sandwiched that between the Huron and Koscheck knockouts. That's when you were like, okay, we got to see Tyron Woodley against better competition, the kind that will bring it. No?
No, that's correct. But also, coming off of that Mark Hart loss and starting his run in the UFC, I mean, he was only 3-2 through 5 fights. So I remember thinking that maybe he didn't have some of that great potential I saw in Strikeforce. Maybe it wasn't going to work in the UFC. The Koscheck and Condit back-to-back finishes are certainly very bright. But Luke, he was unimpressive for a while. Is really where I'm trying to go for that.
I'm a little surprised with that. I thought it was actually pretty impressive. Now, you mentioned, you're right, UFC 171, March 2014, he beats Carlos Condit because he hits him so hard with a leg kick, it actually injures the leg of Carlos Condit, and he couldn't continue. So you're like, okay, you're 3-1 in your first 4 in UFC. Let's really match you up with somebody big. And he fought Rory McDonald, UFC 174 in June of 2014, which he lost because McDonald backed him up, had him at the end of his jab, was able to stuff most of, or if not all, the takedowns, I think most of them, and just did better work for the course of 3 rounds. It was actually fair. I'm not going to say one-sided, BC, but clinical? Something like that?
Yeah, I mean, he got, I think he realized in that fight the lack of, that there was a gap between him and the very elite from a technical standpoint, from a game planning standpoint. He was adding the striking to the wrestling base. He was able to get some stoppages there. And look, obviously, in retrospect, at that point in his career, you get back-to-back stoppages of Josh Koscheck and Carlos Condit. It is very impressive. But I think overall, what I meant by saying unimpressed was I wasn't a believer yet that he had a complete game and was going to be able to put that together. I think the Rory loss in hindsight was maybe a bit humbling, and although he came back very quickly, like 2 months later, Luke, that loss to Rory really kicked off the best run of his career without question, considering he went 6-0-1 right after that and goes on to win a championship. So something got triggered there, not only in you coughing right now, hopefully it's not the vid, Luke, and obviously Woodley figuring out what he was missing.
I swallowed wrong. I apologize. You're right. It's the McDonald loss. Then after that, he fights Dong Hyun Kim. I remember this fight very, very vividly. When he fought on August 23rd of 2014, I apologize, in Macau. He knocks out Dong Hyun Kim in just 1 minute into the first round. This is the part of his career that makes Tyron Woodley how you understand him today. Because as you indicated, he goes on a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 fight. I won't say win streak because there's a draw with Wonderboy Thompson in there, but remember, that was fight of the night in the middle. So it may have been a draw, but for a draw to be a fight of the night doesn't happen too often. In the Figueiredo and Moreno, something like this here, you got to get something pretty special. That sandwiching moment from August of 2014 until September of 2018, that's the window in which Tyron Woodley becomes Tyron Woodley. So he beats Dong Hyun Kim, and then the Kelvin Gastelum fight wasn't great, BC. But Kelvin had missed weight. He had made some excuses. And then later we found out that Tyron Woodley had injuries to his foot and still performed the way he did. I think he got a lot of respect for that. Then he follows it up by fighting for a title at UFC 201 and smokes Robbie Lawler inside the first round. You're like, wow, dude, this guy beat Kim, Gastelum, and Lawler, finished 2 of them inside the first round. He is... yes, he won the title, but that was, super impressive as a run.
And it changed what we thought of him, not just because he was the world champion, but Luke, let's not forget, there was a long gap between the Robbie Lawler fight where he got the title opportunity and the Gastelum fight. It was something like, a year and a half right there. There were a lot of talk. I remember being there at UFC 201 in Atlanta. There was a lot of talk that Woodley maybe didn't deserve this. He'd been off a long time. He had a couple nice wins together over some good names. I mean, if you consider that, 5-fight run, he had won 4 of them and beating Condit, Koscheck, and Gastelum. And Stun Gun is is that Stun Gun there, Luke? Dong Hung Kim? Or am I screwing up?
No, you're right.
Yes, it is. That's nothing to blink at. But Luke, the Gastelum win had been so ho-hum, and maybe we know now the injuries, as you mentioned, and Gastelum winning weight. But let's not forget, it took him a long time to win respect. And I'm not saying he won the respect by knocking out Lawler. There were still people who were questioning through the title defenses that would follow, is he really as good as it looks? But I love what he did with that opportunity against Robbie, and I know we can, in hindsight, again, say, was Robbie more shop-worn at that point than we realized? He had gone through hell in consecutive wars with Rory and Carlos Condit. I mean, you can say a lot of that, but I saw a Tyron Woodley who put the whole game together at that point in his career, realized how to be explosive, that the wrestling could be there if he needed it, but that he, as an athletic, explosive force who figured out things like timing and distance, he put it all together, Luke, and that knockout was surprising against Robbie Lawler. But it's just wild, maybe similar to Stipe to some degree, how even each step along the way through his biggest fights, he never really had the public's heart. He never had can you put that toward Dana sort of at every turn, putting him down? Maybe that adds and fuels it. But I don't remember Tyron Woodley ever really getting his due until finally when the run was when the run was over.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, people definitely respected him. When he beat Robbie Lawler, you're right, there was some consternation and some hand-wringing about to what extent he was porting over damage that he had taken in the Condit fight. Fine. But Robbie Lawler was also, I mean, that was the other problem, too, is like Tyron was beating people's favorite fighters for a time, or at least in the case of Lawler, he definitely was. And then Thompson and Maya were well-liked on some level, too. So he was out there beating, like, nice guys and or beloved figures. He never had a villain to fight, exactly. I think that kind of hurt him. I mean, maybe that's what the Colby fight would have been if it had happened at a different time. But in any case, so he beats Lawler and then follows it up with one of the best shows we've ever seen, UFC 205, in a Fight of the Year candidate. I think that's right. Certainly one Fight of the Night.
Great fight. Great fight. Momentum changes.
Boring in spots, but that one epic sort of... There was a couple epic moments, I suppose, through both of the fights, but... There was a moment there where he nearly gets stopped, Wonder Boy, and he has to hang on for dear goddamn life. And how he did is kind of amazing, and the beating that Woodley put on him was equally amazing. You had to walk out of there being like, wow, these two really, they poured out the jug that night in New York City.
Right, and I think that because of what happened in the second fight, people forget how great that first fight was, how close Wonderboy was to winning the championship, how Woodley really was able to prove, even though he only came away with a draw, that he actually was the better fighter that night, Luke. I'm not saying he didn't, he deserved to win or whatever, but I mean, Woodley showed you championship merit in that fight. But if I'm talking about the fact that he never really got his due, he lost whatever momentum or money in the bank he had with the Wonder Boy rematch, Luke. Can we go back there for a second? Can we go back to UFC 209, March of 2017? In hindsight, Luke, because there was a lot of debate afterwards, was that the worst title fight we've ever seen? The majority decision win by Woodley, in which both just were content to play chess from the outside? Or was it an interesting technical back and forth that the diehards did appreciate at the time, even though they were mocked? And maybe we should give more respect, because although entertainment value, it didn't bring it, we are now seeing very different sides of Tyron Woodley's game. He can go in there with the Destroyer and Lawler and knock him the hell out, and now he can go in there with a very technical performer in Thompson, and okay, did he wow you? No, but he didn't lose. And he got his hand raised. So what do you remember about that emotional ride from how badly people hated that fight?
I was there for UFC 209. I was there. And remember, it was a lot of pent-up feeling. One, those guys had a fight of the night the first time. There were some interesting moments in the second fight, but they were much more fleeting relative to the first. And the other problem was, remember, Tony and Khabib were supposed to fight on that card. I actually interviewed Khabib at Media Day, and I remember I was like, wow, dude, my guy has bad cotton mouth. I mean, his lips looked like he'd been walking through the Sahara for 45 days and 45 nights, man. It was bad. And, of course, he had to be rushed to the hospital and couldn't make weight. That was that card. And so everyone was depressed about at the last fucking minute losing Tony versus Khabib. And then you had this fight, which was, again, you're living in the shadow of the first one, and it had its moments, but not really. Plus, the other thing I never understood was Tyron got more blame for that than Wonder Boy did. And it's like, dude, both of them basically created a situation that was kind of like this. But because Tyron was backing up, I feel like he had to eat a little bit more of the shit sandwich than Wonder Boy ever did. Do you feel like that's true?
100%. And I think that because he never had the support of Dana White, and I really can't. Look, that matters when you are a champion. I mean, look, remember when Renan Barão was champion, for example? Nobody wanted to see Renan Barão headline a UFC pay-per-view. What did Dana do? He'd go out in the interview and say, no, you guys don't understand. This guy might be the pound-for-pound best in the world. That's what you do as a promoter to fill in the gaps for your fighter. And I feel like there was something Dana just did not like about Tyron Woodley and held that against him and talked bad about him at every turn and really threw some more gasoline on the fire with the way that this fight went off, where not only did you not get Tony Khabib, like you mentioned, Luke, but the supporting fights for this pay-per-view main event, you were there. Wasn't it Rashad Evans against Daniel Kelly and David Tamer against Lando Venata? I mean, this was not a spectacular card. Then this main event dies, and they did the cardinal sin that Dana hates, which is not going after it, right? Trying to be cute and outpoint somebody. So instead of celebrating it all at any point that Woodley got through two fights with Wonder Boy and didn't lose his title, and they were both thrilling at opposite ends of the spectrum, this was where, hey, if you didn't like Tyron Woodley before, I'm going to give you a lot of reasons to hate him now. And I feel like that was unwarranted.
Well, he only threw gasoline on the fire in UFC 214, July of 2017. This is where John Jones expressed his undying support for me in my career. And he won, Tyron Woodley did, via unanimous decision against Demian Maia. Now, here was the problem with this fight, BC. I remember being there. He got booed in the building considerably, and not just once, several times through the course of that fight. That was a complicated fight because basically Tyron Woodley doesn't get credit for being the guy to write the blueprint on how to stop and defend the takedowns of Demian Maia, who has unorthodox takedowns, particularly against the fence with that baseball slide that he does. Kamaru Usman can say what he wants, and Colby Covington can say what they want, even Gilbert Burns to an extent. But the guy, well, I'm sorry, what am I saying? Let me just go back. Demian, yes, because Colby and Kamaru fought Demian as well. Sorry, I had a bit of a brain freeze there for a second. The point I'm trying to make is, I think he defended something like, forget how many attempts it was, some huge double-digit attempt, and Demian Maia never got close. You can criticize the performance, BC, that Tyron Woodley turned in, because what you can say is it was a defensive masterpiece. And that's exactly what it was. All the guys who fought Maia after Tyron, they all benefited from what he did. However, it was just one-sided. It was only a defensive masterpiece. There was hardly any offense that really counted or was really very good. He got booed in the fucking building. And I think he doubled down on, like, kind of fuck the crowd a little bit. And that was, to me, the low point for for Tyron Woodley and the fan base, despite how difficult that place he had risen to was.
And although I'm being very, in retrospect, positive toward Woodley and saying to a certain degree I think Dana did him wrong, and I do agree with that. You get why Dana got pissed off. Everybody wants a champion to go after the finish against somebody. And this is where Woodley, this is where I give Woodley a lot of credit. And, I mentioned that thing about Dana could have gotten on the mic and said, we have another Barão or whatever. You know what he could have gotten on the mic and said is, we have another Floyd Mayweather and Tyron Woodley. We have another guy who basically says, whatever your skill set is, I'm going to take that away from you. For Lawler, it was, I'm going to beat you to the punch and get you out of there. For Woodley, it was, I'm just going to slow down the pace of this fight and outpoint you. And what Woodley figured out here, Luke, against Wonder Boy was what I was trying to say. What Woodley figured out in this one, again, was to just take away the one chance Maia had at victory. So you saw a guy who I think was starting, despite the boos and people turning on him, he was starting to climb up the pound-for-pound ladder, unless you had something against him, because his efficiency and the fact that he wasn't young. I mean, he finally came around to the title title, into his mid-30s here. He figured out a way to stay efficient. He was always going to be there if you rushed him. If you made it a firefight, he was always going to have that danger, and he always kept that right hand as a reminder of that. But he wasn't going out of his way to use it and put himself in trouble. If he could beat you one way by taking away your greatest skill, he would do that. And Luke, whether you were entertained or not, that worked brilliantly throughout his title defense reign. And I think ended up being the factor that led to him falling apart now, because he became very much a front runner. He would outthink you and out-efficient you, but if he could not beat you the way he planned, he didn't know how to transfer back to that guy of old who would go after it. So there was certainly a price he paid in this, and something I think certainly happened to him mentally along the way. Maybe it was believing his own press clippings, the rap music career, the acting, the TMZ show. He really was trying to basically say, if the UFC won't market me, I'll market myself. But somewhere along that transaction, even though he would defend the title one more time against Till, which we're going to mention, he stopped being the same guy, and it ended up hurting him when things fell apart.
And then it takes us finally to the last win of his career, to date anyway. Maybe he'll get one on Saturday. The Darren Till win, UFC 228, September of 2018 in Dallas, Texas. And it wasn't especially close. Dropped him and submitted him, got his black belt from Dean Thomas there. This was the I told you so moment in his career, because Till had beaten Wonder Boy and Cerrone, although the Wonder Boy win was, dicey to put it mildly. But he had been declared the winner, and so he was riding a ton of momentum into this contest. And Tyron made easy work of him, basically. He was never in trouble in this contest. And did if anyone did any dominating, it was him. Do you agree that this was the moment he was like, you better put some respect on my name?
This is the moment I bumped him up to number 3 pound for pound in the world, and was really beginning to be upset where people weren't recognizing what they're seeing. Luke, he played into the storyline that Dana went out of his way to prop Till up and try to make him maybe McGregor 2.0 and say, hey, we got a potential marketable guy. Let's rush him into the title shot. And Woodley had his way with him. This is arguably, his most impressive performance, although obviously knocking out Robbie Lawler early in round 1 is equally as memorable here. But he didn't give Till a chance. He completely controlled and dominated this fight. So it's interesting in hindsight, Luke, to the point I just made about if he's in control of the fight at this point in his career, he's dominant. But yet that clock is ticking. He's spending a lot of time on other things than fighting. And it's still remarkable, no matter what you want to pin it on, where he was on September 8th, 2018, beating Till, to who he showed up as on March 2nd, 2019, 6 months later or whatever, against Kamaru Usman. It's just a different guy. Something changed along the way, Luke.
So then it takes us to this, and I want to treat this as all one thing. They're all very different, but I wanted to do a mini resume review because I kind of wanted to remember why people were so high on Tyron, and then what this last chapter means. So everyone knows the story at this point. In March of 2019 at UFC 235, decisioned by Kamaru Usman. In May of 2020, he fought Gilbert Burns, decisioned, losing there. And then finally, against Colby Covington in September, he got stopped, although via rib injury, in the 5th there. It is the memory of the wins over Thompson, Maia, and Till. They are but a distant memory, and it's unfortunate because he has this career that clearly builds and crescendos and gets to a neat place. And then just as soon as it does, all of it seems to come undone. Do you have any comments beyond what we've already kind of said about that 3-fight losing streak? I
pulled off specific negatives almost about each fight. The Usman one, you could tell that he was going through a lot as he's laying on his back, and Usman is dominating round after round, rinse and repeat with the wrestling. That Luke, he can't figure out why he can't summon what used to be inside of him to counter somebody, to figure out what somebody's doing and get around that. It seemed like he had a game plan of what he was going to do. That game plan got taken away from him. And then, Luke, he almost seemed just content with that. I just don't have it, and that's fine. And I think he was really going through a mental and emotional struggle with that, and it produced just an awful performance, Luke. He was getting handled with ease, and he had nothing. Then you got the Gilbert Burns fight where I just saw a failure to launch. I feel like, it goes down in our memory banks as a lot of the same rinse and repeat as the Usman fight because of how well he was handled. But Luke, he just could not pull the trigger. I don't know if it was an unwillingness. It just couldn't summon that connection there, that to win this fight, I'm going to have to be somebody I didn't expect to have to be. And then against Covington, Luke, this is almost the saddest of the three because he was more offensive than those previous two fights combined, yet he just didn't have anything. He looked old. Even though he had the, let's say, intention to try to let his hands go, there was just nothing there. So this was a slide that was as disastrous and surprising as, let's say, Renan Barão's slide from champion to nobody in a couple fights, or Johnny Hendricks' slide, too, was fairly dramatic the same way, where he went from championship level to just an also-ran. But, Luke, this was extra weird comparative to those two, because you just saw a guy who was not putting his best foot forward in these three losses. And, to my point in the Covington fight, I think he tried at least, but he just could not activate what may have been left in there. Like, we almost would have been more satisfied, Luke, in any of these three fights if he had straight up let his hands go and got knocked the hell out, where you're like, okay, he's lost a giant step, but at least he's going out there to win it. The theme of these three fights was not only did he not have it and couldn't activate it, he's just not trying to win anymore. And this is what brings a lot of fear for me for him entering this Vicente Luque fight. It could go disastrously bad. I hope for his sake, Luke, that he brings whatever's left of him and he lets it go, because this is weird. This has been very weird. And now, he woke up and he's 38 years old. So what do you have left? Should you even be in there on Saturday? Can you make us forget about those three fights, win or lose, with your performance here? A lot riding on the shoulders of a guy who never really got his due until it was too late. And now we're straight up ready to write off again, only this time for rightful reasons, Luke.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to that, except, it's kind of interesting that, Tyron Woodley had success. I think the reason why he did have success is because he was a plus-level athlete, and he represents, folks don't realize this, he's around now, but he represents a different generation of MMA. He's the oldest champion in UFC history to have that. I think he held and then defended the title at a later age than any other UFC champion. As your camera falls apart again, because this is a great...
No, it's working. It's working. Mage, is this working? It looks like it's working.
Yeah, they're going to put him back on the screen. The only thing I would add to that is, he was able to do a lot, but he was able to do it despite his age, but that was eventually going to catch up with him. And now you've got Covingtons and Burns's and Kamaru's. That's another generation than the one he represents. And I just don't think he's got it in him to obviously he didn't, to defeat those guys. We'll see about Luque. Luque is an interesting test case as well.
City is on edge.
You don't want National Guard on every corner.
This is where the ask comes.
I can do this on my own, or we can work together.
You tried lightly this time.
You're gonna make a mess.
Yeah, well, I love making messes.
Maybe there's some justice in the world. Someone cares about the truth.
You make sure the right thing's done.
It's bigger than the two of us now.